The Maui Method is a breakthrough process we developed after the Lahaina fires to safely handle and neutralize damaged electric vehicle batteries, which can pose a serious fire risk if they're not managed properly. Lithium-ion batteries are a big part of our everyday lives, and we don't want to villainize them. They power the tools, cars, and devices we rely on in our everyday lives. What we've created is a multi-stage system with built-in safeguards that reduce fire risk at every step and prevent these batteries from overheating or igniting. Until now, there wasn't a process anywhere in the country or even around the world that could safely neutralize this volume of batteries. The Maui Method changes that. It's safe, it's cost-effective, and it protects our operators, our community, and our environment. We're grateful to everyone who helped develop it and for Maui County to lead this kind of work. And to be able to share it with other communities is truly something to be proud of.
None of us are anti-battery. We love batteries, I love all energy. We're extremely energy dependent. The fact that my cell phone can run all day long and I can talk on it is amazing. But with that, so we're not villainizing batteries, we're providing options here. One of the big difficulties that we ran into, and we still have, is the threat sort of matrix of batteries, right? They generate flammable vapors, so they will jettison in an off-gas hydrogen. Toxic vapors, the electrolyte breaks down into HF, or hydrofluoric acid. And the metals, when they go into thermal runaway, shoot out in a particulate that I have been doing hazardous materials emergency response for 20 years, and I've never said nickel and IDLH, right, or deadly in the same sentence until I started working on batteries. So we have this multi-pronged threat. And furthermore, there isn't a subtitle C, so a hazardous waste disposal facility or a recycler in the island, so these batteries have to go back to the continent to be processed, to be disposed of. The process that we will describe is technically the on-site treatment of hazardous waste. And as we do such, right, so it's not a listed waste, it's characteristic, but as we do that, and we treat this material, it goes from being a very dangerous hazardous waste material to a not hazardous waste. The biggest, in my opinion, the biggest achievement of what we have behind us is a unified command between the county and the state. And going through that emergency permit and getting that permit and making that administrative burden that has been extremely difficult up until this point, jumping that hurdle, right? So now this is something that I see as scalable, right? You can go from a small battery to what we have behind us. And that's really important because, like I identified, this problem is not getting smaller and not going away, right? And right about the time we figure this one out, there's gonna be the next, right? But for right now, this is a hugely important, I see, landmark moment for the stewardship of the land and the people, human health and the environment, and everything that comes with that. And not only doing it a way, but doing it the right way. You can look at it functionally, and it's fairly simple, right? You just say, okay, yeah, you're just taking batteries, you brine them down to make them safer, and then you smash them. Functionally, yes. But when you dive deeper into the procedures that we've developed and that are completely open source, right? That we wanted to ensure that this was the polio vaccine for batteries, right? So we attempted to we got an evaluation on a patent right after 2023 because we didn't want to have private industry patent this and license it back to us. This was a product. We found out that it wasn't patentable, which is great. We did not infringe on anyone else's intellectual property, which was even better. And since then, we've been sharing this at large. These SOPs are out there. But when you read the SOPs and you read the method, it's important to understand the intent behind each step. It's not a recipe that you can just say, it's not the joy of cooking, but the joy of batteries, right? It's understanding that each time we touch these things and each time we progress through the Maui Method, the real intent is to decrease risk, right? We are making it safer each time we touch it. We are dropping the risk each time we touch it until it becomes acceptable to move over oceans to the continent, wherever it has to go, wherever that final place is, we have made this safe.
Batteries touch all of us, whether it's environmental management, it's leadership of our county, EPA, contractors doing this type of work, emergency management agencies, fire departments, police, everybody is impacted by this Department of Health. And the Department of Health is unique in the sense that you have the emergency response side, you have the solid waste division and the hazardous waste division, all considering these issues and how their delegated responsibility from the federal government works to try to help solve this problem at the state and local level. And collectively, I truly believe we can solve this problem and be the leaders in this country.
Batteries touch from beginning to end so many different authorities, so many different, kuleana, that it's really, really important to attack this issue and to approach this issue in a unified front. So let's talk a little bit about what we're looking at here, right? So before any of this was here that you saw, there was a pre-sampling that went on. We need to know the existing conditions, right? We're not going to leave dirt behind. We're not going to leave contamination behind. That is not part of how we do business. So we go out there and we pre-sample. What are the existing conditions? And then we engineered this whole area. We, DOH and the county, engineered this whole area, pre-sampling, and then a protective plastic layer goes down, a visqueen, a very thick polymer visqueen, and then a geotextile mat, and then rock, right, your gravel that we can operate on. So any drop that goes off there is not hitting the native land, right, the pre-existing soil. And that will get tested and wrapped up and all at the end, and then we'll go back and sample again. And the sampling says, all right, here's the proof that we proved no wrong. Additionally, and I mentioned a little bit earlier because we're all smelling that smell, but we have real-time continuous telemetry-based air monitoring happening all the time on this site. So we are taking measurements from 5-gas meter for FD guys back there, right? So flammable, gas, oxygen, volatile organic compounds. So we're the vapor part of batteries we can capture on that instrument. We also have particulate monitors because as batteries fail, they can generate this plume, this cloud of extremely fine metals. Most of these batteries have a nickel manganese cobalt cathode, and as that essentially atomizes and gets thrown in, it is, as Jenkins will say, retiring firefighters off one exposure, right? So that is something that we are controlling out here. We do our stuff after we've brought down the energy, but we also have the receipts to prove that we have not had any offsite migration of that contamination, right? So not only air, but also in the soil and on the ground that we lay in. So as we roll that up, right, all of that, like I said, it's real-time telemetry based and data logged. So all of that information is available. Because my favorite number as an environmental scientist is 0 or non-detect, right? I love zeros. That is what I want to see all the time, right? So that's what we're able to provide out here. You'll see the wind socks that indicates sort of exclusion zone boundaries and the wind direction. A lot of this stuff, when they fail, it does go up into the air, right? It's a cloud.
So just a little bit of site map for you, starting from left to right. You see this 40-foot Matson container. That's designated right now to put all of our nickel metal hydride batteries in it. The reason for that is that we have them stacked in a certain level and how they're going to move by weight. We're going to declare those as nickel metal hydride, and those will move for either disposal or recycling on the mainland. You'll see a blue container that you pass on the way in. That's Penco, who's the environmental contractor for the state. That's all their gear in there, a lot of their supplies. The red roll-off is for all of our municipal waste that we're generating on site. None of it's hazardous. This white container here is our first Frankenstein box. We're really excited about it. And so there's other materials that we've compared our material to, which doesn't have a specific identification number or proper shipping name, generally speaking, but moves like a material called polymeric beads. And what Penco did is they took that poly top, which is not a very breathable fabric, it's kind of like a fumigation tent, and they took it down to one of the sail repair places in Kaka'ako and put like Sunbrella on it. So it's hydrophobic on the top, keep water kind of out and wanting to bead off, but allows really good ventilation from the inside. We need to ventilate that through both of our packages and that container to make sure that we're well below the explosive limits for those gases. So that's what you see there in the white container. You can see all of our drums. That's going to be our first stop, is we'll walk on the trail, we'll show you the drums from an upwind location and explain a little bit about how we're managing those drums. And then our next stop will be as we turn the corner past the brine tanks, and then we'll head to the tent.
Being able to take this stuff from a battery and an unstable material that might go off, we take it from material that has that potential, right, a very high state of energy. And as we destroy it in the field by the rules, we get down to a place where it's like, okay, we are generating a small amount of nuisance hydrogen gas, right? No different than polymetric beads in their flammable atmosphere or scrap metal. But because we're playing by the rules, it's no longer hazardous waste. It can move with engineering controls. So we don't capture any of that. So we've improved upon not only the material, the characteristics of that, but we've brought that down to a very low state of energy. So we just ensure success to the nth. And that's really the Maui method and understanding that process.
We also want to say this isn't the only way to do this, right? There are more elegant ways to do this. We used a shredder in the LA wildfires, which greatly enhanced our throughput and the quality of the material that we processed. Here, we were concerned about cost and time. We have a county amount of money involved in this and the state amount of money, and we were trying to find our lowest available methodology that would get us to the result that we needed and respect those cost parameters.
We're not saying this is the only way, we're saying it's the only way that's been done, and we know it can be done, and we've done it multiple times. So I think that's a big part to it too, is that this is a provable process. So as we walk to the tent, take a look at the brine tanks. These 3 tanks right here are that saltwater solution that we use to discharge the energy from the batteries. That's the first step at which we really decrease the risk and the threat. That brine solution that we use, sodium chloride, sodium bicarbonate, there are other mixtures that go faster, right? But they generally involve worse and more hazardous materials, right? Like sodium hydroxide, the skin peeler, right? That works pretty good, but that's not what we want to use. And really, the focus of this was for fire departments, right? What's easy to find and plentifully available and cheap.
So we take that material after we rendered it safe from out of the bushes and temporarily stored it here. We put in the brine, as Chris said, for 3 days minimum, and then we take it out and start our destruction process.
There's a very specific and explicit definition of what a battery is, right? And the whole punchline of this process is we are removing that definition. Once it moves through this, it no longer meets either one of those definitions and is no longer a battery. What you're seeing right now is it's a prepped cell, but we have very specific roles on the team.
Right, so what he's checking is surface voltage so that when the crews go to undo some of the fasteners, we can demonstrate that there's nothing on there that's going to shock them at the surface. And they're being mindful of all the terminals, and as they continue to undo fasteners, they're checking for voltage.
There is a significant difference between hazardous waste criteria and hazardous materials, right? So even more so here in the state of Hawaii is that there are what's called the TPESLs, Tropical Pacific Environmental Action Levels. It's very, very important that we are not just spreading the problem around, that we are controlling the problem, we're getting around it, and we're being good environmental stewards. And they're starting to get rid of this stuff that we can separate out, right? So we have kind of 3 waste streams. One is the not batteries, 2 is e-waste, right? So all the control units, the copper, there may be a couple capacitors in there come out, and then the 3rd waste stream is scrap metal, right? So there's a lot of steel in there that hold these things, you know, really tight. So that will go in the dumpster behind. That is your scrap metal. That's the casing of the module. That's the fasteners. That's the lattice structure of the frame. And then the batteries are going to go into those 2 drums that are staged right here. So you'll watch them. But once we do that, we get them out, we'll start chewing them up, and you guys will see the whole process.
We try to let the machine do as much work as possible, but if we don't manage some of those fasteners, we can turn it into this metal mess where the batteries are stuck in there because we don't take out a lot of the rods and metal structure that'll bend under the force of that machine. So you're going to see that once he gets this out and they get those rods out, that these batteries will come apart pretty quick. Instead of making a big mess, he's identifying the metals and getting those in the bucket or off to the side for the bucket later to go in the bin. If something happens on this pad that we don't like and it gets hot, we just push it in the drink and it goes under water, and that thermal energy is contained inside that water.
Where this water that they're using on the hose that you can see just recirculates to that brine tank. It's actually brine solution right there.
So one thing Chris is talking about in the water, just to reiterate, that all this water is going through a trash pump. It's recycling into that same tank. Nothing's falling off, and we got full containment of that water. We've had no leaks on this pad, but CAD's supplying water just for a little dust control. We anticipate this material might get a little bit warm after we put it in the drum. I'm sorry that it's boring, but our brine worked on this one. However, we'll process each one of these cells, and I'm gonna go get one for you in a second. I'll bring it over.
So that's one of our fry baskets that Jenkins was just lifting over his head. We call that a fry basket because, like McDonald's, right? It's what your french fries go into. So we will put loose batteries in those, right? Because if you throw them just directly in the brine, you got to go find them and pull them back out. So we use that just like a fry basket. So we'll put loose modules, cells, whatever needs to go in there that's not attached to any of its, sort of casing or scaffold, and we'll just dunk that. And then in 3 days, we can pull that right back out, and it gets enough contact with the brine solution, with the holes in the drum, that, we call them fry baskets, and it's stuck. So now we're starting to work through the batteries. So you can see, we have tiger's teeth, or what the tooth attachments on that bucket are called. They pierce the batteries really effectively, and then we'll use the thumb to sort of shred them. When we're talking about the shredder, right, it was really important to conceptualize that for the public, because when you say shredder, you think of like a wood chipper. Our shredders do not use momentum, they use torque. So it's a slow, maybe 60 RPM process. And one of my PIOs elegantly put it like to talk about is, it's like turning peanuts into peanut butter, right? So it's a slow process, very controlled. We use a 1/2-inch cutting surface on the smaller shredder and about 1 inch to 1.25 inches on the larger one.
You see how it kind of falls apart, and you see the black and a lot of the plastic torn up? That one cell is no longer a battery. Now, if we had that in a shredder, we would make that material wonderful. But this, we got to make sure that it has no more circuit, right? Now, there could be still an electrochemical reaction occurring that generates heat for a while. You let it rest for no more than 24 hours, and that comes back to ambient. And then all we have is that persistent generation of hydrogen. So they're gonna sort through some of these and make a pile of stuff that we know has already been processed, so that Eric is not over-processing material that he's already gone through. And then they'll just start slinging that into the drum.
So this is a single cell. There's a bunch of pouch cells all stacked on top of each other. This is one pouch cell. You can see that it's still intact. So we got to fail this one. So we'll use the excavator, or we can physically fail it. So far, our test has shown that our brine worked and we got no more energy in this pack, which is good. And that is no longer a battery.
So this is still defined as a battery, right? It is still has the potential to hold energy. The positive and negative terminal is still connected. Second one, this no longer meets the definition of US EPA's or DOT's definition of a battery. That is
so you can see the white plastic inside is the separator. The black is the graphite structure on the anode and cathode. And if you see copper, that's the anode. It's kind of hard to see the cathode right now because it would normally be like a silvery color. But you definitely can see the copper anode. And the reason you see the copper is because the graphite scraped off. And it's that graphite structure that holds all the lithium ions.
All right, so this is a few examples of cylindrical cells that came out of that RAV4 that was a Tesla battery. You can see this one was destroyed. This is no longer a battery, okay? Now it gets a little bit more complicated here because you've got this cylindrical casing and the entire casing is negative and this small cap is positive. And so we call it the current interrupter device. Now you can see when this brine, it didn't fully corrode that cap, and that's a victory for us because if you put just too much salt, not enough bicarb, you won't buffer that solution, you'll corrode this thing right out. Now on cylindricals, it's not too bad because that means that the brine got into the battery and definitely helped short it. But also, we just don't like that kind of caustic brine. This did an effective job de-energizing. We didn't have any heat events after we got finished brining these.
But what we've found is that in both our brine solution for Maui and Los Angeles, when we went through and tested that, we profiled it for disposal, we did not fail hazardous materials criteria, right? So hazardous waste criteria, right? So it never had essentially leached the metals out that RCRA is concerned of, right? The RCRA 8, nickel's not on that. But when we profiled that, we found that it was not technically characteristic or tested as a hazardous waste. So it's twice as salty as the ocean. It does have metals in it, right? There's also all the junk from the modules themselves, right? Road grime, whatever else is on it, right? So there's some sludge at the bottom, but we have not yet tested positive for a hazardous waste criteria definition of that water.
You saw a moment ago they were compacting down the material in that drum. Out of respect for the state and the county, this costs money, right? So we're trying to fit the most material we can into each drum, but not overload it so it meets a bulk weight criteria. Most of our drums, when they weighed them, have not gone over 400 pounds. They're averaging about 350. So that's important to note that we're getting as much material and also space considerations. So the equipment helps us with that. You'll see that they have fixed the drum lid on this and the ring bolts just so that when they sling this drum, that it maintains its structure. If we don't have that secured correctly, the top will pop off and it'll squeeze the drum and damage it. And then they'll open it back up and manage it once it's on the pallet. So one thing you see Kahau doing right now is that he's brought that drum back down. He has managed it so that the lid is now loose again. And he's got a temp gun. I'm a big fan of temp guns as well as thermal imagers, but we have oftentimes, in the fire service especially, skewed thermal images or readings. So here, he can take that temp gun, it shoots a laser beam, and he can look at different temperature gradients in that drum as it stands now. Then in a half an hour or so, we'll go back and look at it and see if we're on the rise. We'll monitor that throughout the day, and hopefully by the time we leave, we see our downward trend, and then we're definitely good leaving it overnight. Other times we've stayed a little bit longer till we get the response on that downward trend of temperature, so we know it's not gonna have a chance of continuing to climb. We haven't gotten temperatures on the outside of those drums of the lid above 220, and then within 24 hours it's back to ambient.
There's no reality in which a failure or a negative consequence is appropriate or acceptable to us, to anybody, right? So every single step is designed, again, to reduce that risk. But additionally, all of our notes were open this whole time, right? There was no point in time where we're like, let's not talk to the shipper. It was the full, here are the notes, here's what we did to the carriers, the shippers. It was intermodal. So when it hit the continent, it got on a truck, right? Every single step along the way. We were in Nevada and we watched our containers come in, right? We followed this every single step of the way, and we left no room for failure. This is an example of how it can be done. Is this the only way? Well, right now, but in the future, I mean, I would love to have like a fancier, better tool. There's a very good hammer right now. This hammer will drive that nail, but there may be a better tool for that. We don't know, but this is possible, and this is the way it can be done. So this is the way we're doing it, maintaining those qualities, right? That quality is the most important part of this, because the stakes are far too high, right? If you put the stuff on a ship and the shipper finds out and they say, you know what, we're not moving the stuff anymore. Well, guess what? You're dead in the water. Right now, nobody's moving stuff on the boat because one cut corner or one little failure here. You have to be so thorough, as we are pointing out here, because it is that important. You do it wrong once and you're not doing it ever again, not even right.
We've gotten so much cooperation for Maui from so many places, and the fact that we may be able to provide something in exchange for all of that for other communities that have gone through this kind of thing. But what we can do for the rest of the state and the rest of the country, I think, is exciting. And again, I think this is just another sign of what it looks like when collaboration is working at whatever level, you know, in small ways, big ways. But the fact of the matter is it comes to this. So mahalo, mahalo, mahalo to the team. Thank you.